Welcome to the Fleet Success Show. We are a podcast dedicated to talking about the fundamentals, standards, and best practices that empower today's fleets to achieve fleet success. Let's get into the show.
All right, welcome back for another episode of the Fleet Success Show. I'm your host, Josh Turley. My co-host, Jeff Jenkins.
Hey, Josh.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
A long several weeks.
Very, very long, yes.
It was back and forth. We were at FleetCon together. You went to McLeod.
I went to Atlanta for a sales conference.
Well, and then what was before FleetCon? There was another one.
Iona.
There you go. So just back and forth road warrior. Welcome back to the show. I didn't burn it down without you, so that was good.
That is good.
So last week, the last couple of weeks, we've talked about the presentation we gave at FleetCon. Then last week we talked about intentional culture from a technician perspective, which was a question that I had after that presentation. I had another question that came from a local city here, and I had two managers from this city came up and asked me about one-on-ones. And during the presentation, as I talked about, how do you improve technician retention? Mm-hmm. Right? We don't have to go hire employees if we keep good employees around. One of the ways to do that was to have really good quality one-on-ones.
Right.
And we recommend doing them weekly, at least bi-weekly, if not weekly, but not to let it go longer than that, because otherwise, just too much time lapses. You're not having timely conversations. If you need to have a hard conversation, too much time can go on and you're not having that conversation.
Yep.
You don't get to know your people on a more personal level. Right. And so they came up and they asked me, they're like, well, how do we have effective one-on-ones weekly when I have 13 people working for me and he has 18 people? 18 directly working for him that directly report to him. And they're all technicians.
Right. That's a big number.
It's huge.
13's a big number.
13's a big number. And so it got me going on what is the right number? And we've had conversations about this in the past here at the company, and I've talked to many of my mentors about this, because one of our exercises we like to do is kind of design a future org chart. Yes. Like, what does this company need to look like in next year, in 3 years, in 10 years, in order to grow? What roles do we need? Who are they going to report to? Who's responsible for that function? And so we're always kind of looking at that number and figuring out what is the ideal number. Because you don't want it to be too heavy. You don't want to have it be too top heavy where you have too much management, too much leadership, and not enough tactic, right? Where you're not getting enough of the work done. We see that plenty in school systems and university systems where they're very top heavy.
Yes.
And you don't want that. You don't want it too much. But what I've kind of always gone back to is the 6 to 8 seems to be about the golden ratio. You could have fewer than that, but when you're running fewer than that, you have room and capacity to grow a team underneath you. And I want to say even the military uses about 6 to 8. In fact, I think their squads are 4.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think their platoon is 8 and their squads are 4. It's made up of 2 squads. Now I could be totally wrong. People in the military are going to be like, dude, you're an idiot. But if I remember from my fanatical following of Band of Brothers, I think their squads are made of 2 teams, 2 firing teams of 4, and the platoons are 2 squads.
But even 8 it's at the top end of what you
right.
have. So,
but even then, you've got a squad leader,
right,
that kind of reports to the platoon leader, and then you've got usually 2 to 3 platoons in a company, and then in a company it's anywhere from 5 companies that are under a single battalion, right? So. And I might have gotten that whole structure wrong too, but I think that's about the gist of it. In each time, you can kind of see that trend, which is it's usually never more than 6 to 8.
Right.
Jeff Bezos had kind of a similar thing. He called it the 2 pizza rule, which is when you get to a point that you can't feed your team with 2 pizzas, it's too big. Now, I think you have to kind of put that into, 2 thick crust Chicago deep dish pizzas, maybe.
Not the, hey, Jeff can eat a whole pizza by himself because it's Little
exactly.
Caesars.
Right. Thin crust, I could pound that whole thing. I got a half a pizza myself.
Yep.
So I would go, I might stretch it to 3 pizza rules, right? For the big eaters, especially in fleet. We got some big eaters in fleet.
Yes, we do.
Right. But
We're hungry.
If you're over 3 pizzas, your team's too big.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fair assessment. So we're looking at this, and and as they asked me, like, well, how do we do that? We've got 13 people, 18 people. If the ideal team size is 6 to 8, well, that's just not doable. And so for them, I think they've got a couple options. And the first one is you could keep your team of 13, right? Nobody's telling you can't do that. It's just very difficult,
right?
Because you need to have effective one-on-ones. And if you decide not to do a one-on-one because you don't have time to do it, what you're really saying is retention's not a problem that you want to focus on.
And retention's a problem everyone should focus on.
You would think.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a problem for those guys, right? And so in that case, like, you could do nothing and just have the status quo carry forward. Another option they could do, and we've actually kind of gone around this route, is start looking for people that are ready for kind of a leadership or, to take on more responsibility.
Yep.
And you can have them take half your team and just put them as like a team lead over that team. They'll report to the team lead, and the team lead reports to you. But we've done that with several of our next layer of management. We're installing kind of a middle management layer. But we're doing it slowly. Like, not every department has a layer of middle management. We're doing it as the team grows. Like our engineering team, we finally got to like 13 or 14 on that. And so we said, okay, who in here is ready or, seems like they're most capable of leading a team? And it's not necessarily going to be your best tech either. You're going to look for somebody who's got some leadership potential, that has influence, that people enjoy being around, that kind of shows you those attributes that a good leader has.
Yeah, and I would caution just choosing someone because they're the best at the role.
Right.
We did that in trucking. So the best dispatcher, we're going to make them an operations manager, and it does not translate.
Nope.
At all.
Because the skills are different.
Yeah, they're totally different. And so people say, hey, they're the best one at their job currently. Let's go ahead and bump them up to a manager. And they just may not be prepared, may not have the skill sets.
They don't know how to coach.
Right.
So you want to look for people that are already demonstrating leadership capabilities.
Yes.
And like, okay, I'm going to tap you and see how it goes. But then you could take like if you want to split a team of 13, you could take 6 of those, your most junior ones, and have them report to the team lead.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take the most senior ones and they report to you. And the idea there is that you are focusing your time on the ones that are the highest quality that you're most afraid to lose. Right. And then you let this team lead kind of get their teeth sharpened by working with the junior techs and helping show them the ropes. And they can command respect in that area too, because they know more than the juniors, but they might not know more than the seniors. And so that's another reason we kind of split that up in our engineering team that way, was to give a leader a chance to grow and kind of be a mentor instead of working with somebody that they can't really mentor and manage.
Yeah, so I'm going to play devil advocate because I had an experience to where I was pushing one-on-ones at a previous job. And the person had 7 direct reports. And when I was asking about one-on-ones, they shot back and said no, because 3 people, so-and-so, they don't need one-on-ones. They're the best people I have. They don't need to have that because they're already where I want them to be.
Well, and I think, did we talk about one-on-ones in an earlier podcast episode?
Well, we did.
Yeah.
We did, but what that person didn't see is, well, that person now doesn't have the opportunity to talk to you about what their issues are, what their growth plan is, or whatever else. So you're thinking, hey, they don't need it because they're great.
They're terrific, right?
But they need it more than anybody else because you're trying to help develop them and give them a career path.
Yeah. And usually, like, when I set up one-on-ones, is I try to make it where it's not my agenda. Like, I want all the talking points to come from my people. That it's their meeting with me. Like I carve out 30 minutes and it's their time.
Right.
Like, this is my time. I'm just dedicating me to you, and you have me for free for 30 minutes. What do you want to talk about? And I have questions, like we talked about that, where you get to know them personally, see how things are going. But it really is like, it's a time for them to, what do I need to work on? And if you're not giving them that opportunity, well, you're perfect. You're excellent. You're also robbing them the opportunity to improve.
Yeah. It's funny because you say that, oh, you're perfect, I don't need to spend time with you. And then it comes time for an annual review or whatever, right? And they've got no feedback.
Yeah.
They don't know how they're doing. You say you're doing great.
They don't know the score.
Yeah, they don't know it whatsoever. And then they're going to get upset because something goes wrong in their annual review or whatever else. And they're like, well, wait a second, you didn't tell me I wasn't doing a good job.
Right. Or worse yet, there is nothing wrong with the job they're doing. So I should be expecting a nice little pay raise, right?
Yeah, a big bump.
And there's nothing there.
And then they get like 2.5%, 3%, which is standard, just set in the budget. And you're like,
Yep.
wait a second.
Yeah.
I thought I was doing great.
When you don't have those conversations frequently, like things like that can fester. They can go on for long periods of time without being addressed. You can think, like, oh man, I keep having this conversation in my head, but I'm never having it out loud. And then you get to that year mark and all of a sudden this stuff all comes out. You could have avoided all of that with a one-on-one. So that's their first option, right? Split the team, have a team lead that's ready for leadership, take the juniors, and then they focus their time on the seniors.
Yep.
Just by doing that, it's a team of 13. If somebody took 6 and that's, the 7th becomes a team lead, that means you've got how many left? 5 left plus the team lead. So now you're back to 6. It's a good ratio.
Very good.
Now, if you're 18, you might have to split that into 2. You might have to have 2 teams of 6 with your 3 to 4 seniors plus your 2 team leads. But you're at a point, though, is like once you get to 6, and you can stretch this. Like I've stretched this to about 8. When I'm at 9, that's when I really start feeling it. And this is the second option you could do, right? Is you could move them to biweekly and then do half on one week and half on the other week. Biweekly can work if you're working with some really talented technical people and they know what they need to do and it works, right? Like most of my one-on-ones I do biweekly, but I'm also meeting with my entire team every week.
Yes.
And so there's not really a week that goes by where I haven't talked to my team at least once or twice. So they could do that as switch it to biweekly, and then that means that they would be doing 6 one week and 7 the other. The other option is they could just not do one-on-ones with the juniors. Like this is something else that somebody mentioned to me is like, well, they could just focus on the top talent, right? And a lot of managers, I think, would make the mistake of spending all of their time with the junior technicians, right? And what I've learned is that often we spend, you use the 80-20 rule, and we spend 80% of our time on the bottom 20%, right? Like we deal with the bottom 20% behavioral issues or anything like that, whereas we should be spending our time on the top 20%. How do we nurture them and grow them? Because who's going to hurt more when they quit? It's not going to be your junior.
No,
it's going to be your top performer,
yep.
Right? and like that's what's going to hurt is, when you lose a top performer. And so you want to focus your energy and investment, water the trees that are going to bear the best fruit. And in this case, that's going to be your top techs. So as a fleet manager, as a shop foreman, shop supervisor, spending your time with your top employees really is where the priority should be. And if you want to spend time with the juniors, do it more in a group setting where you can coach them all together. Or assign them a mentor that you can delegate and say, hey, pair them up. So that 13 now becomes 6 just through, each one of you has a direct mentor that is working with you.
Yeah, and I don't advocate to skipping your bottom talent. If you choose to do that, you should at least line them up with a mentor, with a senior person who's going to help them. Or
otherwise, they're never going to get better.
No.
And then they're going to look for, because what do they want? Well, they want growth and they want attention, and they deserve that in a career. And this comes, I think, the overall bottom line, this whole thing, right? If you choose not to do it, if you choose to only do it for a few of them, if you, like whatever it comes down to, if you keep the status quo, right? The whole saying that we always go back to was, you don't have a time problem, you have a priority problem. And that's really what you're saying is, if you choose not to do this, your people are not a priority, and it's no wonder you have a retention issue.
Because your people should be your number one.
As a leader,
priority.
This should be the absolute number one
Hands
priority.
down.
The job comes secondary. The people are the job.
Mm-hmm.
This is like one of my favorite lines. If you guys ever watch The Crown, right? The king turns to the Prince of Wales, or not the Prince of Wales, whatever. Princess Elizabeth's husband at the time, Prince Philip. And it says, she is the job, right? Like, because he was getting a little bit distracted. He was like, well, it's all the pomp and circumstance, and like, I'm going to be king, and, or crown prince, or whatever they call that. King consort, and he lost sight of like what was most important was making sure that the queen was supported, right? And sometimes we lose that as managers. We get trapped in the glory of being a leader and like, we're the number one person in our department, and we forget what the purpose of the job is. And I'll tell you, as a leader, the people are the job, and they get your job done, right?
Right.
So I was trying to think if there was another option for these guys, but
I like to get success and to develop your people. There is no other option. I mean, honestly, you have to have your one-on-ones, and if you have too many people to where you can't do that, you're never going to get ahead of the game.
Well, so what's the biggest number of direct reports you've had?
Well, it's a two-part answer. Okay. So one was 62, but that was as a dispatcher when I first started out in trucking.
Right.
Right. But that was a singular role. There was a singular focus, and I didn't have one-on-ones. I talked to every driver every single day, but it was more about, showing up on time. What do you want your next load to be? When do you have to go home? If they had like their miles per gallon was too low, or their idle time was too high, or they weren't getting the revenue or the miles on the trucks, you would talk to them about that. But there wasn't a designated time.
Were these company-owned trucks?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So these are company employees.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. If you take away dispatching, 13 is the largest number I've ever had in a leadership role.
Yeah. I think I've gotten up to 11. And 11, like, I start feeling stress.
Yeah, 13 was a lot.
9 is like I start feeling it. By 11, I was like, I can't, like, I was not effective as a leader anymore.
Yeah.
And it was at that point where it was like, where's my focus? And I think you mentioned, that with the drivers, it was one single role. And I think strategically, that's another thing as a manager that we have to learn, is that if you have one role you're responsible for, it's easier to kind of replicate and say, like, this is the plan for drivers. This is our strategic plan. This is how I'm going to make a difference and shape and work on my role instead of in my role.
Yep.
But a lot of times what happens is, that 13 or 14 might be 5 or 6 different roles. And now you've got to figure out, like, how is this person going to be effective in their job? And how is this person effective in their job? And now, like, you're playing chess, but you're doing it with 2 hands, like, you can only move one piece at a time. And what ends up happening is you lose focus, or you can't focus on the right things at the right time, and you've got too much to worry about. And so you never make enough progress on any one thing. And so that's usually what burns people out, is that they're like spread too thin.
Yeah. And it's funny, when I had those 13, I bet you I canceled more than I kept.
Yeah.
Because I felt so overwhelmed. And if there was one thing to skip, it was always going to be the one-on-one.
Right.
Right. Which was odd, because that's what was the most important thing. And I was like, I'll just talk to him later. Right. I'll just pull him aside and talk to him. But that never happens.
Yeah. So that's one option, right? Is, if you've got only like one role that you're responsible for, they're all technicians, because then you can do a little bit more group training. They still need one-on-one conversations, so maybe you do a shorter one-on-one.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It doesn't have to be an hour. It doesn't have to be an hour and a half. It can be a 30-minute conversation.
Yeah, mine are all 30 minutes.
Right. If you can actually, get in there, stay focused, and get to what you need to talk about, 30 minutes is plenty of time.
Yeah.
Like, I set mine for an hour, but if it's a half hour, great.
Yeah.
If it needs to go longer, then it goes a little bit longer. But, 30 minutes is probably the sweet spot.
Yeah. So another thing I'll do is I will ask during the interview process, when I'm interviewing somebody for a leadership position, I'll ask them the question, how many direct reports have you had?
And they will go ahead and give you a false number, right?
Well, they'll give me a big number,
Yeah.
right? Like, well, I've managed a department, of 200 people.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm thinking, why are you applying for this job? Right. Like, I've got 45 people at the company. I don't need a 200 manager. But what I like to do is I'll ask them, can you tell me the names of your team members, like what their spouses' names were and their kids' names were?
Right.
Or like, how well did you know each of your people? Because if you're truly a leader, like, you would know the names of your spouses and your kids for your people. And at least in my opinion, because it tells me how well you knew them and if you're friends with them, or if, like, you were doing one-on-ones. And a lot of them immediately back up. They're like, well, I didn't have that many reporting to me. I had like 2 that directly reported to me, and then I had a team of 10 underneath them, right? And all of a sudden they'll back up, and then I'll let them recover a little bit, but then I'll turn it right back around and say, okay, so the 2 people, could you tell me the names of their spouses?
Right.
And most people can usually tell me, oh yeah, well, Bob was married to Sharon, and Julie had a husband named Tim, and it was like, okay, but then. So every once in a while I'll get them like, oh, well, I actually didn't ever know that. Okay. Well, did you ever do like one-on-one conversations with them, or, oh no, well, we never really did that in my company. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'll use that. But it's one of the things that tells me is how compassionate or empathetic are you as a leader, that you're focused on your people and, you care about what matters most in their lives. To these gentlemen, you've got 13, 18 people working for you. We talk about the 3 signs of job misery, and the number one is anonymity, because they're anonymous. They're a ghost in the machine. And if you can't tell me the names of, their spouses, maybe they're not married, the names of their pets or their parents, right? You can't tell me who's most important to them. They're not important to you. And that's the message you're sending to them. So if you want to improve employee retention, do your one-on-ones, get to know your people. If you have too many people, start restructuring the team so you can have effective one-on-ones.
What's funny is you said that where they like expand that number, right? I've actually done that in the past. Someone's asked me, how many people have you had reporting you before? I'm like, 1,400. Right? Because I was over all of customer service and operations for a trucking, and we had 1,300 drivers. Yeah. Right? And then you have all these other people that report up under it as well. And it's just such a BS answer.
Right. Yeah. And you're asking because you really want to know. It was like, well, how big is the biggest team you've ever led? And some people, like, it helps you see how strategic they can get versus tactical. But at the same time, I just usually want to know, what's the biggest number of direct reports you've ever had to interact with on a daily basis.
Yeah. And I've got some work to do because I'm in my head thinking about the spouses' names of my direct reports right now, and I can't think of one.
You can't think of one?
Of one person's. Yeah, I know everybody else. There's one I can't think of right now.
Are they fairly new?
Yes.
Okay. Because you got time, right? Like, you got to build that up.
Yeah.
Well, I actually had it this morning. Somebody asked me, well, what was his wife's name? And I'm like, oh, crap. I know all of his kids' names. I can't remember his wife's name for the life of me. So it happens.
I'll just put it on age.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't have that excuse. So.
Neither do I, really.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. As always, if you want to hear more tips like this, you can go check out the Fleet Success Playbook at fleetsuccessplaybook.com. And then we have Summit 2.0 coming up, fleetsuccesssummit.com. That's March 21st and 22nd in Luxor, Las Vegas.
And we're about to announce another speaker.
That's right.
We're
getting really close.
Yep, we're going to. I think we'll nail that one down this week, so hopefully next week we'll be able to.
All right, so keep checking on the website. We'll have new speakers up there. We're doing awesome. Like, I'm super excited about that. And until next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Fleet Success Show. If you like the show, we'd appreciate your 5-star review. Be sure to subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts and come hang out with us on social media at Fleet Success. See you next time.